1937, it was published pretty much how Tolkien wanted it to be. So this is the dust jacket on it, which Tolkien illustrated, and it's got a little blurb kind of thing in the front and stuff on the back, and it reads, "If you care for journeys there and back, out of the comfortable Western world, over the edge of the wilds and home again, and can take an interest in a humble hero, parentheses, blessed with a little wisdom and a little courage and considerable good luck, in parentheses, here is the record of such a journey and such a traveler. The period is the ancient time between the age of Faerie and the dominion of men, when the famous forest of Mirkwood was still standing and the mountains were full of danger. In following the path of this humble adventurer, you will learn, by the way, as he did, if you do not already know all about these things, much about trolls, goblins, dwarves, and elves, and get some glimpses into the history and politics. That's strange. Politics of a neglected but important period. For Mr. Bilbo Baggins visited various notable persons, conversed with the dragon Smaug, the Magnificent, was present rather unwillingly at the Battle of Five Armies. This is all the more remarkable since he was a hobbit. Hobbits have hitherto been passed over in history and legend, perhaps because they as a rule preferred comfort to excitement. But this account, based on his personal memoirs of the one exciting year in the otherwise quiet life of Mr. Baggins, will give you a fair idea of this estimable people, now, it is said, becoming rather rare. They do not like noise." And then there's stuff about Tolkien and his background as being a professor at Oxford and stuff. Has 4 children. The Hobbit was written for them, read aloud to them in nursery days, which is, of course, the way in which practically all the immortal children's stories have come into being. Okay? Obviously, whoever wrote the blurb had not read or heard the fairy story essay. Okay? Why? Well, this is 1937. It's 2 years before the fairy story essay. Because Tolkien argues, obviously, in the fairy story essay, that's not how fairy stories came into being. Okay? So that's one of the things, it's like Tolkien is correcting the blurb on his own book when he delivers the fairy story essay. But the fame of the story spread beyond his immediate family, and the manuscript of The Hobbit was lent to friends in Oxford and read to their children. And then it kind of compares the beginning of this with, not the beginning as in the opening, but its origins and such, with Charles Lutwidge Dodson's or Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland. So this is what it looks like on the cover, and they've even got in the facsimile edition what the cost was in 1937. 7 shillings, 6. I don't remember what D stands for. And then Tolkien's maps, and then all of Tolkien's drawings. But I'm going to come back to this when we get to chapter 5. Okay, so we left off the other day somewhere around page 20. It was actually, I think, page 19 when Gandalf says, if I say he's a burglar, etc., and he's going to, do more than you think he can. So I want to pick up on 21. They're talking about how they will go about, attacking or approaching, let's say, the mountain. Okay? And Thorin says, we'll go up the river, blah, blah, blah. Gandalf, that would be no good. Not without a mighty warrior. Even a hero. And Tolkien capitalizes warrior in hero. Okay? I tried to find one. Warriors are busy fighting, notice, one another in distant lands. And in this neighborhood, heroes are scarce or simply not to be found. Notice, warriors aren't out fighting dragons and ogres and trolls and goblins. They're fighting each other. Okay? And heroes are non-existent here. Swords in these parts. Okay, what are these parts? Is he talking specifically about the Shire? Or is he talking about the Shire and the area between the Shire and the mountain? Swords in these parts are mostly blunt, and axes are used for trees, and shields as cradles or dish covers, and dragons are comfortably far off, and therefore legendary. Okay? Comfortably far off, Smaug. It takes them weeks to get to where Smaug is. Okay? So notice what have happened to military or martial items. Swords, axes.
Useless. They become.
It's not that they're useless.
They become hereditary. They're just kind of over the.
Okay, hereditary and or, I mean, for example, what are shields now used for? Dish covers and cradles. So you've had swords turned and shields turned to non-martial purposes, turned into everyday usage. Okay? That is why I settled on burglary. In other words, you asked me to find you a companion. Why? Because 13 is an unlucky number. You can't go off into the wild with 13. You got to have 14 or 12, kind of a thing. So, I thought of a hero. I thought of a warrior. Couldn't find any. So, I settled on burglary. Like burglary is the next best option to a hero. Especially when I remembered the existence of a side door. That is, I know that there's a secret entrance to the halls in the Lonely Mountain. And here's our little Bilbo Baggins, the burglar, the chosen and selected burglar. So now let's get on and make some plans. So Bilbo is essentially what? He's a stand-in. He's like a cardboard cutout for Arnold Schwarzenegger. Schwarzenegger, implying the hero, the warrior. They don't have any of those, so instead, we're going to give you the opposite. Okay? And yet, by the time we get to the end of the novel, what do we see?
Probably better off.
Okay, what else? He is a hero. He's a small warrior, but he's a warrior. After all, how many times will he come to save the dwarves' bacon, so to speak? I mean, repeatedly. He gets them out of the halls of the Wood Elf King. He gets them away from the spiders. Okay?
Isn't that all because he's just kind of unnoticeable?
Partially. We'll talk about that. Partially. Okay? So Thorin agrees. Page 23. Thorin goes on and he's talking about, what it used to be like back in the old days when his grandfather was king under the mountain and stuff. And then, how they were driven out from the mountain and such. And the top of page 23. He says, so my grandfather's halls became full of armor and jewels and carvings and cups, and the toy market of Dale was the wonder of the north. That is, when you have dwarves working in the mountain, as they are wont to do, you get all this great stuff. Then he describes dragons for us. Dragons steal gold and jewels, from men and elves and dwarves, wherever they can find them. And they guard their plunder as long as they can live, which is practically forever, unless they are killed, and never enjoy a brass ring of it. Okay? That's the crux of the problem. Dragons do what with treasure?
Sit on it.
That's it. All they do is sit on it. They're glorified accountants. They know every piece of the treasure. Okay? In the Old English epic, for which Tolkien was known as a major scholar, Beowulf, okay? What causes, if you've never read it, or if you have read it, maybe in high school, what causes the dragon at the end of the epic to finally come out of his lair and to torch Beowulf's kingdom? Well, one guy sneaks in and steals a golden cup. That's it. One cup out of this huge mound of treasure. What happens in here that causes Smaug to come out? Bilbo steals a cup. He also speaks riddles to him, okay? Which kind of, Smaug's not a dummy. He's a smart dragon, and he puts two and two together. So Thorin goes on. Indeed, they hardly know a good bit of work from a bad, though they usually have a good notion of the current market value. That's why I said, they're glorified accountants. They understand the value of gold. They don't understand what is good workmanship from what is bad workmanship. And they can't make a thing for themselves, not even mend a little loose scale of their armor. That is, because dragons are armor-plated, their scales are like armor. If they have a scale that comes loose, can't fix that. All right? As we'll see later on. There were lots of dragons in the north in those days, and gold was probably getting scarce up there. With the dwarves flying south or getting killed and all the general waste and destruction, the dragons make going from bad to worse. There is a most specially greedy, strong, and wicked worm called Smaug. And what happens? One day he takes up into the air and he flies south and he takes the mountain. And the dwarves flee.
So the dragons used to be farther north?
Yes. Yes. We're not told in this book, okay? But all the dragons of Middle Earth essentially descend from one dragon named Encalagon the Black. Okay? So, Gandalf tells them about the map. He gives it to Thorin, and they kind of make their plans for the next morning. They give their breakfast menu request to Bilbo, and he falls asleep. Chapter 2, Bilbo wakes up late in the morning, finds the dwarves all gone, and he's kind of thinking, good, I don't have to worry about it. Gandalf shows up, gets him moving. He runs off after them, forgetting his handkerchiefs, and meets up with them at the Green Dragon Inn at Bywater. So they go on. Page 30. I'm only mentioning this because it's a typo. Okay? And there's a typo in this text, even though you have this note at the beginning of the book, this note on the text. For the present text, that file has been compared again line by line with the earlier editions. A number of further corrections have been made to present a text that, as closely as possible, represents Tolkien's final intended form. And yet, page 30, first paragraph at the top of the page, third line up from the bottom, we read, fourth line up from the bottom, we read, mostly it had been as good as may can be, can be, That second can be, that's called dittography. It's ditto, What's ditto mean? Repeat. It's a simple repetition. How do I know it's wrong? I compared it with the facsimile of the first edition. It's not there. All right? So even though Douglas Anderson says, this is essentially a perfect text or a perfected text, somebody proofreading it didn't catch that, which should be pretty simple to catch. Anyways, so they go on and they, get rained on and everything, and the weather's horrible, and they see off in the distance a light in some woods. Thorin comes up with the good idea. Says, well, you're a burglar. Go burgle. Go see what the light is. So Bilbo goes off, and what does he discover? Trolls. Named William or Bill, Bert, and Tom. Okay? And what are Bill, Bert, and Tom talking about? They're tired of eating sheep or mutton, right? Or some of them are tired of eating mutton. And Bilbo comes up with the bright idea, well, I'm a burglar. Why don't I just reach my hand in this one troll's pocket and try to take something. And the narrator tells us, page 34, exact middle of the page. There was a purse in it, okay, in Bill's pocket, as big as a bag to Bilbo. Bilbo thought, ha, warming to his new work as he lifted it carefully out. This is a beginning. That is, I'm making a good start to being a burglar. It was. Trolls' purses are the mischief, and this was no exception. Okay? He reaches and takes it out, and the purse talks. The purse itself, okay, says, "Hey, who are you?" Okay? Notice the purse speaks with a Cockney accent, as do the trolls. Okay? Earlier, we saw page 33. We hear, "Mutton yesterday, mutton today, blimey if it don't look like mutton again tomorrow. Never a blink a bit of man flesh have we had for long enough. What the hell, William? What's I thinking?" Okay, what the hell? Where does hell figure, because that's what hell is, where does hell figure in Middle Earth? It's not there. That's another example of, okay, Tolkien's just writing this story for his children, or telling this story, and he uses phrases and stuff from our world that get plopped in. Why? Because he's not giving as much serious thought to this story as he will when he finishes this story, or even before he finishes this, as he starts The Lord of the Rings. Okay? So, Bilbo gets caught. The dwarves come to check on him. They get caught. Gandalf rescues them. How?
He cracks a stone. Or they turn it into stone. He makes the sun come up.
Does he make the sun come? Is he that powerful?
He stalls them.
Rise.
He stalls them really well.
He stalls them.
Yeah.
He does ventriloquism, essentially. He throws his voice. He pretends he's Bill. He pretends he's Tom. He pretends he's Bert. They argue and fight. And he says, "Dawn catch you all." And the sun breaks through. And they're turned into stone. Okay? So, they find the trolls' cave. And what do, quiz question, Gandalf and Thorin and Bilbo, by the way, pull out from it? Swords. Glamdring, Orcrist, and an unnamed sword. It's not really a sword, it's a dagger. Okay? But for Bilbo, it's a sword. You know, because a dagger's like this long. And keep in mind, Bilbo's like this tall. So this long for this tall is a sword. That's like this long for this tall. Okay? So we have Glamdring and Orcrist. Okay? And we later on are told by Elrond, half elven, who made those swords.
Elves.
Which elves?
Is-
The elves of Gondolin. Do we hear anything else about Gondolin here? No. It's referred to again. Bilbo's going to say the name again. Okay? But that's it. We don't get anything else. And we find out it was made for the Goblin Wars. Okay? Between the elves and the elves of Gondolin and the goblins. But that's it. Okay? Probably because Tolkien at this time, he's got the Gondolin stories written down partially, but he doesn't know how this story fits in with the chronology or the history of those earlier stories. This obviously comes later. Okay? But he doesn't know its connection, in other words. He knows it occurs in the same world. But how they're connected, he's not aware. That's going to come up in chapter 5. Okay? So, they go on. Gandalf leads them to Rivendell. Okay? What is our first introduction to elves? They're singing. Okay? Is their song like the dwarf song? which is kind of dark and deep and somber, you know. No. Oh, what are you doing and where are you going? Your ponies need shoeing, the river is flowing. Oh, tra-la-la-la-lolly, here down in the valley. Tra-la-la-la-lally, here down in the valley. What are you seeking? Where are you making? The faggots are reeking, the bannocks are baking. Oh, tra-la-la-la-lolly, the valley is jolly, ha-ha. You know. What kind of song is this? Louder? Upbeat and joyous, okay? What else? Light, airy. You kind of get an image of the elves here, you know, prancing around and, you know, dancing and being silly, okay? We meet the elves in The Lord of the Rings, however, and they're just the opposite of that. They are somber and serious, and everything is gravely important. They don't sing silly songs anymore, like, you know, channeling, you know, VeggieTales. They don't do that in The Lord of the Rings. They do that here. Okay? So, page 49, we're told Elrond knew all about runes of every kind. Okay? Notice, does Gandalf read the runes on the swords? No. Would the Gandalf of the Lord of the Rings be able to read the runes on the swords? Yes, he would. Okay. Why? Because Tolkien, between this story and the Lord of the Rings, Tolkien kind of totally reimagines Gandalf. That is, Gandalf becomes much, much more than what he is here. What do I mean?
Wasn't a Maya?
I don't think so. I don't think he knew yet what Gandalf was. Gandalf, from the Silmarillion, Gandalf is what's called a Maya, okay? Plural, Maiar. What are these? These are, lack of a better phrase, lesser angelic beings. Okay? We're going to hear a reference in here to the necromancer. The necromancer is Sauron from the Lord of the Rings. Sauron is also one of these. Okay? Sauron is like a what in Christian mythology? He's a demon. He's a fallen angel. Gandalf is not fallen. He's an angel or an angelic being. Okay? But in here, I don't think Tolkien has necessarily has that idea infleshed in any way. I mean, he might have already begun, okay, and have Gandalf in mind as he's referred to in the Silmarillion. Olorin is his name there. Okay. He might have some of those stories already written. I'd have to go back and reread the History of Middle-earth stuff. But he doesn't give any of that impression here. Here, Gandalf is just what? A wandering wizard, known primarily for fireworks. Okay? Beginning of the Lord of the Rings, he's a wandering wizard known primarily for fireworks. Who is he known primarily for fireworks by? The Hobbits. You get out of the Shire, what do other people know about Gandalf? He's more than just a fireworks seller. Okay? Even Barnum and Butterbur Bree knows there's more to Gandalf than just fireworks. And the farther south you go, it's like, oh, Gandalf, the Grey, Mithrandir, you know, as the elves call him and such. Okay? But here, he apparently doesn't know how to read these old runes. Okay? Elrond does. He knew all about runes of every kind. And that day, he looked at the swords they had brought from the troll's lair and says, these are not troll make. They're old swords, very old swords of the high elves of the west, my kin. They were made in Gondolin for the goblin wars. They must have come from a dragon's horde or goblin plunder. He says, Thorn, yours is named Orcrist, the goblin cleaver. Okay? Also called what by the goblins? Biter. Okay? Gandalf's sword is Glamdring, foe hammer. beater is what the dwarves call them. So he takes a look at the map, holds it up to the moonlight, and said, well, what do you know? Moon runes. Runes written under the very same shaped moon on the same day, however many years ago. What day is it? Midsummer's Eve. So, a Midsummer Eve with a crescent moon, however many years ago, this map had these runes written on it. And he can read it, and what's it say? Page 50. Stand by the gray stone when the thrush knocks, and the setting sun with the last light of Durin's day will shine upon the keyhole. Durin's day. Thorin, first day of the new year, is, as all should know, well, in Lord of the Rings, Elrond would know this. As probably would Gandalf. It's what? It's the first day of the last moon of autumn on the threshold of winter. We call it Durin's Day. Why? Because the last moon of autumn and the sun are in the sky together. Okay? And they're like, well, when's that likely ever to happen again? Well, we get to the end of the novel. So, over hill, under hill. They have to get over the Misty Mountains in order to get beyond, and then they've got to go through Mirkwood, etc. So, as they're making their way over the Misty Mountains, big old storm erupts. And what do they see while the storm is erupting? Stone giants throwing rocks back and forth. Now, some people have said this isn't really stone giants, that it's the effect of the lightning hitting. No, Tolkien describes it as stone giants throwing rocks. Okay? Page 55. Thorin, this won't do. If we don't get blown off or drowned or struck by lightning, we shall be picked up by some giant and kicked sky high for a football. Now, not one of those oblong-shaped balls like we have in the United States. Soccer ball is what he means. We're going to be drop-kicked. What? Do they have football in Middle-earth? No, they don't. Though we do find out hobbits invented golf. Okay? We found that out early on. So, what happens? The goblins come and open up the back of the cave where the dwarves and Bilbo and Gandalf are sleeping. And page 57, the cracking of the opening of the door had awakened Frodo, Bilbo, and when goblins came to grab him, there was a terrific flash like lightning in the cave, a smell like gunpowder. Gunpowder? So they get taken down to the Goblin Kingdom. Page 59. I'm trying to get us through fast because I want to finish this on Friday. It's not likely, right in the middle of the page, 59, talking about the goblins and what they make and stuff. It's not unlikely, okay, notice, it's not unlikely means what? It is likely. It is likely, what? That they, the goblins, invented some of the machines that have since troubled the world. What kind of machines? Especially the ingenious devices for killing large numbers of people at once. What kind of devices is he talking about? It's before that, so it couldn't be that. It's 45. Bombs, however, tanks, artillery, okay, for killing large numbers of people at once, for wheels and engines and explosions always delighted them. And also not working with their own hands more than they could help. Now, this is Tolkien speaking. Tolkien, up here, Tolkien lived 1,000 years before he lived. Okay? He hated the modern world. He despised automobiles. just despised them. He didn't like trains. He said trains lead people into slavery. What? How in the world? One day he and his son were out for a walk, and they were on a bluff overlooking in the Thames Valley. And they see a train going down, steam, and his son, Christopher Tolkien, I think it was, like a little kid normally would, little boy at least, normally would be, just, steam train, this is so cool. And his father's like, no, that train is taking slaves to work. And his son's like, what? And Tolkien explained, because of the train, what has happened to people and their connection with work? Well, the work is no longer down the street. The work is no longer something made by their hands for their use or their family's use or their immediate vicinity's use. No. What's the train doing? It's taking them from town or city A to town or city B. And what do they now live for? It's the rat race mentality. Do you work to live, or do you live to work? A lot of people say, I live to work. I get up, I go to work, I go home, I eat, I watch the Idiot Box, I go to bed, I get up, I go to work, I go home. And where is the most of the day where the mind is aware spent? It's at work. That's what Tolkien meant. Okay? So, Gandalf rescues them from the goblins. And chapter 5, Riddles in the Dark, Bilbo gets left behind. Okay? He comes to after being knocked out, and he finds this ring on the floor and picks it up. Page 65. He goes on down, starts walking, pulls out his sword. It's got a bluish tinge to it, so he knows there's goblins nearby because Gandalf's and Thorin's swords did the same. And he makes his way down, and he meets Gollum, page 68. And we're told, that we don't know where Gollum came from or who or what he really was. He just was Gollum, etc. Okay? And Gollum asks Bilbo, page 69, what's he got in his hands is? And Bilbo says, a sword, a blade which came out of Gondolin. Perhaps he sits here and chats with it a bit. A bitsy, my precious. It likes riddles. Perhaps it does it? Bilbo says, okay. You ask first. So Gollum asks a riddle. What has roots as nobody sees, is taller than trees, up it goes, and yet never grows. Gandalf, Bilbo, let's see, it's a mountain. Does it guess easy? It must have a competition with us, my precious. If precious asks and it doesn't answer, we eats it, my precious. If it asks us and we doesn't answer, then we does what it wants, eh? We shows it the way out. Yes? Oh, by the way, I mentioned the other day, The Hobbit, and somewhere between 500 and 1,500 copies. It was published on September 21st. Tolkien's birthday is the 22nd, by the way. 1,500 copies. Okay, this is the little flyer. It came with the facsimile. Okay, so chapter 5. Tolkien rewrites this chapter in about 1947. Okay? He rewrites it because he's making The Hobbit fit with what he's been working on for about the last 9 or 10 years, The Lord of the Rings. And in The Lord of the Rings, in the drafts, he's already come to important information about Bilbo's ring. Well, it's because the second chapter of The Lord of the Rings is all about what? Bilbo's ring. Okay? And how Bilbo came by it, and how Frodo came by it. So, Bilbo tells him who he is in the original, and answers the riddle about the mountain. And Gollum says, does it guess easy? It must have a competition with us, my precious. If precious asks us and it doesn't answer, we eats it. all the same, right? If it asks us and we don't answer, we gives it a present. So it's not we helps it find its way out. We gives it a present. Bill, okay. So they go through the riddles. All the riddles are the same pretty much. And we get down to the last riddle Gollum asks, page 73. This thing all things devours. Birds, beasts, trees, flowers. Gnaws iron, bites steel, grinds hard stones to meal. Slays king, ruins town, beats high mountain down. And he's got Gollum sitting over there, probably making slurping noises, thinking what he's going to taste like. And Bilbo's, getting flustered. And he says, I need more time. Well, that's the answer. Time devours everything. Okay? And we're told Bilbo was saved by pure luck. So Gollum says, fine. Now you have to ask us a question. One more question. And Bilbo can't think of one. He can't think of a riddle. Notice, by the way, they both know the exact same riddles. What must that show? There's some connection back there. Some cultural connection. Okay? So, Bilbo, what do I have in my pockets? That's not a riddle. That's not a fair question. Gollum has him to rights on that one. Okay? But Bilbo says that's it. Gollum, not fair, not fair. Is it fair? Okay? Must give us 3 guesses. So he gets 3 guesses, gets them all wrong. All right? So, they finish, and we're told, Bilbo puts his back, page 75, to the nearest wall, holds out his little sword. He knew, of course, that the riddle game was sacred and of immense antiquity, and even wicked creatures were afraid to cheat when they played at it. But he could not trust this slimy thing. In the original, we're told, page 91, Bilbo puts his back against the wall, okay? But funnily enough, he need not have been alarmed. For one thing, Gollum had learned long, long ago was never, never to cheat at the riddle game, which is a sacred one and of immense antiquity. Notice, in the revised form, it's Bilbo who's thinking. You can't cheat at the riddle game. In the original, it's Gollum who thinks that. So Bilbo asks, in the original, what about the present? Come on, you said you were going to give me a present. Where's my present? Must we give it the thing? Gollum asks. So Gollum goes off to find the present he's going to give to Bilbo. Where is it? Where is it? Bilbo hears him squeaking. Lost, lost, my precious, lost, lost. Bless us and splash us. We haven't the present we promised. We haven't even got it for ourselves. Was Gollum going to give Bilbo the ring? Because that's the precious.
That's what it seems like.
Probably put it on and kill him.
Okay. The implication is Gollum was thinking of giving the ring. That's what the words suggest, at least. Whether or not the intention behind the words is the same is unclear. Okay? So, we get a description of Gollum's ring. In the end, page 92 in the original, Bilbo gathered that Gollum had had a ring, a wonderful, beautiful ring, a ring he had been given for a birthday present. Ages and ages before, in old days when such rings were less uncommon. Sometimes he had it, sometimes he kept it on this little island, etc., etc. And Gollum comes back and says, we are sorry, we didn't mean to cheat. We meant to give it our only present if it won the competition. That's pretty clear. He even offered to catch Bilbo some nice juicy fish to eat as a consolation. Okay? Bilbo, no thank you. And he realizes, I've got the ring he was going to give me. Well, finding's keeping. Never mind, ring would have been mine now if you had found it anyway. So we'll just pretend that, don't worry about the ring. Okay? So he tells Gollum, I'll let you off on one condition. Let him off. Let him off of what? Well, you didn't keep your end of the bargain. Your end of the bargain was you were going to give me a present. You cheated. But I'll let it go on one condition. What's the condition? Yes, what is it? What does it wish us to do, my precious? Help me to get out of these places. Notice in the revised form, that's what Gollum proposes at the beginning of the riddle match. Okay? So, Gollum does help him. Bilbo puts the ring on, okay, and he gets past Gollum. So, page 81. Let's see. Yeah, there's nothing in the original really about this. Bottom of 81. Bilbo almost stopped breathing and went stiff himself. He was desperate. He must get away out of this horrible darkness while he had any strength left. He must fight. He must stab the foul thing, put its eyes out, kill it. Why? There's a little crack, and Gollum's standing right in the middle of it. Bilbo's thinking what? I've got to get out. It's me or him. It's going to be me. He must fight, he must stab the foul thing, put its eyes out, kill it. It meant to kill him. No, not a fair fight. He was invisible now. Gollum had no sword. Gollum had not actually threatened to kill him or tried to yet. What's Bilbo doing?
Talking himself out of it.
Is he talking himself out of it? Or is he thinking along the lines of what is the honorable thing to do? I mean, I'm invisible, he can't see me. I've got a sword, he's unarmed. That'd be a pretty rat bastardy thing to do. To kill a guy who's unarmed and can't see you. I mean, it's worse than stabbing somebody in the back. Okay? So, and he had to actually threaten to kill me. A sudden understanding, a pity mixed with horror, welled up in Bilbo's heart. A glimpse of endless unmarked days without light or hope of betterment, hard stone, cold fish, sneaking and whispering. Notice what motivates Bilbo. Pity. In the revised form. That's not there in this. Why? Because when Tolkien wrote this, he wasn't thinking of the Lord of the Rings. When he revised it, he was revising it to fit one of the central ideas of the Lord of the Rings, to act with pity. That is a key theme in the Lord of the Rings. Okay? So, he gets out. Gollum calls him a thief. Thief, 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 Baggins, we hate it forever. He is a thief, right? His employment is thief. Okay? Out of the frying pan into the fire. Next chapter. Page 85. I know we've only got a minute or so. He wondered whether he ought not, now he had the magic ring, to go back into the horrible, horrible tunnels and look for his friends. He doesn't know that the dwarves are out. He had just made up his mind that it was his duty, that he must turn back, and he felt miserable about it. Notice, he'd made up his mind he was going to go back, even though he really did not want to. And he hears voices. What does that tell us about Bilbo? Beowulf shrunk down. He is a hero. Because heroes do what? They don't do things that they necessarily want to do. You know, 9/11. I pretty much would lay money on this table Every one of those firefighters and cops who ran toward the World Trade Center had a part of their brains going, damn foolish thing to do here, especially after the first building. I bet part of them said, go the other way. Wife's at home or work, kids, future. And they kept going. Okay? Bilbo makes the decision, I've got to go. And then he hears the dwarves. Okay, we'll pick up there on Friday. Like Lilith, we'll never finish.